So I'm Martin Elliott. I was a paediatric cardiac surgeon, then a medical director of a big children's hospital, and then I sat on the board of two other hospitals, one in this country and one in Ireland. So reasonable amount of experience of both working in this environment and then trying to buy them, not as modules, but to rebuild sites. And I've seen those changing demands, and I've seen how design change at the last minute is too expensive. I must say, when I walked into it, it was it felt like coming home to a surgeon. You know, it's a place that you know and love, and obviously where you spent maybe the vast majority of your working life. To walk into a room which is person ready is such a delight. It was quiet, it was solid, it was light, and everything was in the right place. And you know, from a surgeon's point of view, that's kind of the security you need. As I looked around in more detail, everything that I could imagine I needed was also there. So I felt very, very comfortable with it. I really liked it. No, I mean, when it's so good, your mind is probably jumping onto the next user case rather than the one you've got. There's just a worry about it. But I didn't see any problems with it as an environment. I, as a former hospital manager, I'm always interested in flow rather than room. Can I get my patients through here quickly enough so that I can do more of them? And clearly the ability to make it modular through the corridors on either side, or on one side than that side, means that you have the ability to expand. And what's not to like about that? Because you might not have the resources to do it all at once, but I can now see a chance of making my flow work. The immediate picture was this is a working environment, so there's got to be somewhere to rest. I've spoken a bit to you about that before. I think it's really important to bear the staff comfort in mind, because they're there for not just most of the working day, but most of their working lives, as I've implied. So you've got to make it comfortable for them. And the rest of it's about detailed mechanics of running any operating theatre, which is about efficiency, effectiveness, communication, the ability to do the job without hazard or hindrance, and the ability to get access to all the service kit on the floor above in really good space is something I thought was fantastic. I was very tired of having to go to places where it was on the roof and unpleasant for the technicians to walk in. There was always a problem with water getting into the HEPA filters, and you know, this sort of thing is much more sensible, and I can see it fitting into all sorts of different environments, from attached to hospitals to new build hospitals to going away to a crisis site or a war zone, or a camp where people are needing emergency surgical treatment anywhere in the world. It's a really, really sensible approach to it. I think so. I mean, it is what it is at the moment. It's two bog standard but excellent operating rooms of big capacity for most things. We talked about it when we were going around. What would you do if, say, robotic surgery? And you might need more room for that. But I'm very reassured that you might be able to modify your modules, and that when someone wants to put in a robotic suite or two or three, that you'll have found a solution for that space, because this is so flexible and sensible. And why would you want to build on site something that could be built effectively somewhere else and delivered quickly onto a base? It just sounds so simple. And, one wished they built our own houses in that way, so it wasn't taking 2 years to produce a box which just looked like every other box. You could have something which was more modular, more personally designed. You would negotiate with your clients what it should look like. This gives you huge flexibility as a manufacturer, but as if I'm a consumer, it's giving me what I want. Oh, it could help the immediate and long-term needs, because there's never been enough money in the NHS right from the beginning to do everything that people wanted. So everything's a bit of a compromise. But here you're not compromising on function. You may be compromising on Zaina Hadid exterior. You know, whatever, you have to make compromises in every part of it. You know, I'm a child of the 50s. I grew up where all hospitals were in Nissen huts and long tunnels and old military camps and lots of asbestos. They were temporary buildings which lasted for 50 years. That's the story of public health care all over the world. But to do it at the highest quality, where you can predict that at some stage you might want to replace your modules, that makes sense. I mean, the difficulty for any system is going to be working out the true financial model, whether you're paying capital up front or revenue afterwards. And managing the capital revenue split for a hospital finance team is going to be interesting, because that depends on how their finance is going to be raised with a rapidly changing healthcare system. But it's not just a public solution, it's a private solution. I mean, the private sector may get a big increase in demand in the next 10, 15 years. So you can find ways of helping them create capacity that they didn't know they needed. Well, I'm only seeing the surgical bit of it. So for a patient, it depends on the operation they're having. So you could imagine daycare flowing through here with no worries at all, with some sort of lounge built on the side. But for more complicated surgery, they're going to need beds. They're going to need somewhere to be assessed preoperatively, a funnel through into the anaesthetic room, out to a recovery area, plus or minus intensive care, onto beds afterwards. So as it stands, it's the nucleus of a model. So what you built is something which, depending on the space and function demands, can be added to. What's not to like? I would really be conscious as a manager of a hospital or as a surgeon. I'd be managing really hard to think about the flow. How many patients can I do through here whilst keeping my staff happy and these patients safe? So and people, I think, historically haven't given enough thought to flow. It's that will block you in the end, and why we hear so much more about emergency room bed blockers, corridor beds, not enough exit strategy. So you need to think that all the way through at the beginning to make this brilliant piece of kit function to the capacity that it clearly has. I mean, you'd like it running 24 hours a day, wouldn't you? You know, it could. So that's the test for the organisation into which this goes. But as you learn from other clients, you're going to learn how that should work, and that'll be part, I imagine, of your advice strategy. Your opportunity to collect data is huge. This is great, and it's going to meet an immediate demand, but you've studied this in great depth, both from a demand point of view, but also practical design point of view. So I'd be quite interested to hear from you what you see as being the changes you need to build for in the next 10, 20, 50 years' time. Yeah, because you could imagine that as demands change, you're going to be faced with the question of swap the whole lot out, or can I do anything with this, what we've got? Two kinds of similar questions you're going to have to address. And there's also a lot of fundamental research opportunity about how people move about. You know, I remember watching them design the distribution of people at Victoria Tube Station, where there are no barriers. And if you remember, if you've been there, there's no apparent guides to where people go. And they noticed that crowds of people cross each other, and they didn't need them. They just moved on their own. And they did it by sticking little detectors on them to work out where they were on GPS. So you can imagine understanding the movement of people in these environments is a huge research opportunity that you have, because you built it, you know where they go. You can provide information to modify design down the line of just on the way activity takes place. Yeah, I think the opportunity to collect data from a purpose-built system is fantastic. It's just great. Yeah, I'm really impressed by what you've achieved. Walking into it felt perfect. You know, so it was what I was expecting in an ordinary operating theatre. So what's not to like? I mean, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about the bigger operating environments, which have sort of viewing galleries and things that people can see from outside, and monitoring areas for interventional radiology and so on. But the modular bit doesn't bother me because you can just make a bigger module that does all that. It's so when that demand appears, if you've got the basic bricks, the Lego, then you're ready to go. And it seems so much more sensible than wasting decades on a design which has got to be modified too late in the build process. Well, I think it's both, really. I mean, you obviously want to comply with whatever regulation somebody sets, so you don't have much choice of ducking that on something of the scale of the NHS. On the other hand, whatever they think of that in that group now may not exist in 10 years' time, and the hospitals almost certainly will. So you're going to have to respond to the needs of the community, whether it's in the public or the private sector. And the more flexible your design can be, and yet modular, how cool is that? So you're set up irrespective of, I would say from your point of view, you're set up irrespective of what the rules are. This will work within it because you will have to apply them. But whether it's built into a structure of new build hospital or adding value to one that's already there, should do both. That principle will work really well, I think, on most greenfield sites. You're mostly stuck with inadequate brownfield sites and not enough money. So wherever you would try to squeeze this into a plant which exists, a modular approach makes more sense. I think if you're looking at a true greenfield site build, there are health systems around the world which do that, particularly Narayana in India, and they have had great success in making modular, low-cost build with minimal heating costs and so on, because they've thought through the design in a modular way. They're not suitable for England, but they are suitable for India. But the principle is the same as this. It should work fine. And we spent time earlier, I don't think that the end case for something like this should just be the NHS or hospitals in the UK, because I think there are areas of society which don't have enough healthcare. And they're usually on the edge of war zones, where there's a lot of injury, a lot of surgery needed, and you need something that you can put in relatively quickly to meet the needs. That has to be modular, and it's got to be bigger than the current small things that they're working in at the moment with inadequate facilities. This is well planned, could work well. You can blue sky think about how you might use it if you had an opportunity to deal with community care. I mean, lots of talk for years about making consultants go into bigger general practices rather than the other work, patient being the one that moves. On the whole, that's not worked well. And but you can imagine in a suburb having something like this, which is an outlier of the hospital, which is dealing with fast flow surgery where people don't need to stay. Would be brilliant for that. Could go in a pub car park so you can go straight for a meal afterwards and have a wonderful time. But I can imagine that as being an extension of community thinking, and it would, as you move to more bigger general practice groups, you can see that demand might work, and consultants and people doing in surgery might well feel at home in this because it's what they're used to. So they'll come in, do it, go. But it won't work if you've got to keep them in, look after them. That's got to be in bigger units. So I can see a use for it, and I can see a community use for it. And certainly when there's imaging and stuff to be done. So if you, again, take aspects of orthopedics or hand surgery or eye surgery as well, eye surgery particularly, which has got a lot of outreach work. But hand surgery is can be done under local anaesthetic in a small room with ultrasound control, plus or minus an X-ray. That, what's not to like? You can go straight home after that. Just need a dressing room and somewhere to sit down so you don't faint. So you've got to have all that safety stuff. But that you could take one of these in a safety area and your problem solved. and the space is predictable. So somebody in that area has a much more natural assumption about what space you need. You can tell them that. You can demand that they make that space for you, rather than them saying, oh, you've got to fit to this space. So no chance unless you do this. So that form request that we talk about for interventional radiology, that you're making your client, you're making demands of your client, I think, which is quite important. That they aren't necessarily making demands of you, because they often change those. As a surgeon, as anybody working in a hospital, your demands change constantly. You see that with all the IT systems. They don't work out cheap, because by the time people have made their demands, they change them again. But if you're not doing that, this is what's clever about this, I think. This is what we do. This is what you need to give us to make it work. There's no negotiation about the interface, or minimal. I'm sure there's some, but you're not really wasting your time. Give us this and we'll put this in.